again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I am on the steering committee of the festival with Hannah Harlow, our moderator today. And even though I can't see you, I'm so glad you're here. We have had a great day and a half of events, and we've been so excited about the festival this year. It's our second year online and our 16th edition. We hope we're back in person next year, but we've been super lucky with this format to bring new and different authors to the festival. And in fact, it's our biggest event ever with more than 100 people. So we've been really grateful for that silver lining of the pandemic. Just a couple things before we get started. We are using the webinar format. You might know this already, but you'll see and hear the panelists. You won't see yourself, or we won't be able to hear you. But if you have comments, please put them in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're from, if you're new to the festival or an old friend. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A tab, because that allows us to see them more clearly and keep them organized. As you know, yesterday was Independent Bookstore Day. Apparently everyone, all of our panelists had good days. We want to support our independent bookstore partners as well as the bookstores that are joining us today. So I'm going to put the links for all of the bookstores in the chat. That includes the Bookshop of Beverly Farms, where Hannah is the owner, and Jabberwocky Bookshop in Newburyport, which are our partner bookstores, as well as the bookstores of our participants today. And those participants include Alex George, who is a native of England and who read law at Oxford University and worked as a corporate attorney in London and Paris. He is the founder and director of the Unbound Book Festival and the owner of Skylark Bookshop in downtown Columbia, Missouri. He has published 7 novels that have been translated into 10 languages, including Setting Free the Kites and The Paris Hours. And he still practices law in his free time. Kelly Link is the author of the collections Stranger Things Happen, Magic for Beginners, Pretty Monsters, and Get in Trouble. Her short stories have been published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the Best American Short Stories, and Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards. She is a 2018 MacArthur Fellow and has received a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. She is a co-founder of Small Beer Press and runs Book Moon in Easthampton, Massachusetts. Anne Patchett is the author of 8 novels, including The Patron Saint of Liars, Bel Canto, Commonwealth, and The Dutch House. She was the editor of Best American Short Stories 2006 and has written 3 books of nonfiction. She has also won numerous prizes, including the Penn Faulkner Award and the Orange Prize for Fiction. Her work has been translated into more than 30 languages, and she's the co-owner of Parnassus Books in Nashville, Tennessee, where she lives with her husband and their dog, Sparky. Hannah Harlow has an MFA in fiction from the Bennington Writing Seminars. After working in publishing for 17 years, she most recently at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt as the executive director of marketing. She left in 2020 to purchase the Bookshop of Beverly Farms in Beverly, Massachusetts. She lives in the North Shore of Massachusetts with her husband and 2 boys. And as I mentioned, she's also on the steering committee of the Newburyport Literary Festival. Hannah, take it away. Ooh, is that Sparky?
My dog. No, it's my dog.
Okay, Sparky's right here, but he's asleep. So.
Well, thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Leslie. And I see the chat is lighting up already. If you guys change that to all panelists and attendees, then everyone can see, because it's so fun to see where you're all calling in from. And since we're also going to be talking about independent bookstores today, we'd love to hear your what is your local independent store? What's your favorite? So let us know in the chat. I know I love an active chat during these. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. We're here to talk today about the intersection of art and commerce, which sounds like a really heady topic for a Sunday afternoon, but we're going to have fun, I promise. Before I opened my bookstore, as Leslie mentioned, I worked in publishing, and I did things like write headlines for ads and create social media posts and essentially create a lot of content around books. And my point in telling you all that is that there are 1,000 ways you can get it wrong. You can misinterpret a book or undersell it or focus on the wrong thing. And, how do you take a masterpiece like this and reduce it to 10 words? So I'm thrilled to be here with 3 experienced writers who also are in the business of selling books. So we can dig into this a little bit. So I want to start by backing up and hearing all of your origin stories. At what point did you say to yourselves, yeah, I want to own a bookstore? You were all publishing books before you opened your bookstores, I believe. So, when did that become a reality, and how did you make that happen? So Anne, let's start with you.
Well, Parnassus Books will have been open 10 years in November. I never wanted to open a bookstore. I still don't think I want to own a bookstore. But the bookstores in Nashville all closed. Long story, won't get into that. And there was a lot of weeping and wailing and rending of cloth. And basically, we had a Borders and a Davis Kidd that together totaled 60,000 square feet, and they both were profitable every month they were in business, and they went out of business. So just from a math perspective, I thought, you could open a 2,500 square foot bookstore with 60,000 square feet of customers, and it would work out. And it did work out, and in fact, we're 5,000 square feet now. So it just was like, oh my God, isn't somebody else going to do this? But nobody else did. And I met a wonderful woman named Karen Hayes, and we became partners, and she is the manager. The joke is that she does all the work and I pay for everything. And that's it. That's our origin story.
That's me. Yeah, sometimes you gotta step up, right? Alex, what about you? You are British by birth. I believe you went to boarding school in Paris. How did you end up owning a bookstore in Missouri?
So my story when it comes to the bookstore actually begins with the festival that I run, the Unbound Book Festival, and that we began that in 2016. And I tried to get an independent bookstore involved at the time, and I talked to people in St. Louis and people in Kansas City, but they weren't able to do it. And there was no independent bookstore in Columbia, Missouri, which is a little crazy because we have 3 universities here, 100,000 people. There was just this gap in the market. So I asked Barnes & Noble to sell the books at the festival, which they did. And people would come up to me and say, well, this is lovely, but what a shame. What a shame that there isn't an independent bookstore involved. And I heard this again and again and again. And it was that sort of lit this little sort of fire inside my brain going, well, maybe you should think about this. And it was that. And then it was just the enthusiasm that the community responded to the festival. And I began to realize that there was a real hunger in this community and a need in this community for a bookshop like that. And that was really it. And so rather like Anne, there was a gap, and I jumped in.
That's cool. Kelly, you have a history of entrepreneurship. You founded and run Small Beer Press. How does the bookstore fit into your publishing empire?
My husband and I met working in a bookstore in Boston, Avenue Victor Hugo, which was very, very large, very busy. And after that, my husband worked for a couple of years for the ABA. And so we've always had jobs, not just the press, but jobs that were either bookstore related or adjacent to bookstore work. And we had actually tried to buy a bookstore in Northampton when we moved here. We're outbid and thought, well, that's it. That's fine. The place where we live is small. Western Massachusetts, Pioneer Valley is, all of the towns are very small, and there are maybe already 20 bookstores in the area. But in Easthampton, a bookstore, the owner was looking to sell, and I had received a grant that meant that we could buy it. The bookstore is only 1,200 square feet, so it's very manageable, and we don't feel that we have to carry everything because there are so many wonderful bookstores in our community already. And so about a year ago, we put in an offer and made very few changes. We are still getting to know the community and what they're looking for in a bookstore. So we are making changes very gradually.
Yeah, and it's still fairly new for you. I mean, you weren't open that long before the pandemic hit.
We were open to customers for half of the amount of time that we have now been curbside pickup only.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I hope things are still going well.
They're going very well, and everybody who works there is on track to being fully vaccinated in about 2 weeks, at which point we will talk about reopening to the public.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I know I've heard the phrase living the dream a lot since I bought my bookstore last year. And I imagine you all have too. I mean, obviously that can be interpreted many different ways, and maybe people in the chat will tell us what you think it means. But let's, I'd like you to disillusion us. What's it really like to own a bookstore and be a writer? I mean, I think we all have these visions of you sitting around in your stores with like your dog or cat at your feet and like a cup of tea, and it's all cozy, and you get, you're writing these magnificent novels. So can you tell us a little bit what it's really like? And we can start with anyone. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, it's not like that at all. There is there is very little. Well, so we actually have in the back of the shop, we have 2 offices, one upstairs and one downstairs, and there's a desk in the office upstairs. And I remember saying to my my business partner at the time, "Oh, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to write when it's quiet," which just betrays the depths of my ignorance when I jumped into this, because I had no idea just how much work it was going to be. I don't actually spend as much time in the shop as I would like, but when I am there, you are there all the time, whether you're receiving or you're talking to customers or you're doing online orders. There is always something to do, and there is never ever a moment to sit down and start writing. So it's no, it is absolutely not that kind of idea at all. But it's not to say that it's not wonderfully rewarding, but it was just different. And certainly coming off the back of Independent Bookstore Day, when I was on my feet for something like 8 or 9 hours without sitting down, it's tough too. It's physically quite exhausting, but super fun.
Yeah, and when do you do your writing?
So I do my writing at 5 o'clock every morning. I've been doing that for the last 25 years or so. I still work as an attorney and do all these other things. And so really the only time that I can be guaranteed that there aren't going to be clients on the phone, I don't have to go into the shop, is very early in the morning. So that's when I write.
That's crazy. And what about you?
I want to ask Alex, what kind of law do you practice, and does it dovetail with all of this? Tell me it's at least intellectual property law or something.
Oh, I wish. There's not a great demand for intellectual property law in the middle of Missouri, unfortunately. No, I do estate planning and I do corporate work, which are both actually work very well, because I do my best to keep out of court as often as I can and keep my clients out of court. So I'm not sort of beholden to those sorts of timetables. So it actually works very well with doing all these other things.
Amazing though, just when you think that you couldn't get any busier, you meet somebody who is so much busier. And it's like, what have I been complaining about? I don't have a law practice. So I don't work in the store. I say that I am the benevolent overlord, or I am to bookstores what Julia Roberts is to Lancome mascara. I don't manufacture it, package it, market it. I just wear it. And that's enough of a job, because I sort of feel like my job has turned into being Miss Independent Bookstores. And as much as I do work for Parnassus, I kind of do work for the whole ecosystem. And definitely, and I'm finishing a book right now, and I will say to everybody, just get off my case. And they do. The thing that kills me about owning an independent bookstore, the thing that I would really like to dig down in and bitch about, is the galleys, is the fact that my reading life has been destroyed.
Mhm.
It's been great in a lot of ways. I used to read Henry James. I read The Awkward Age 3 times. It meant a lot to me. All I read now are galleys, and I don't finish most of them.
Mhm.
So, you know, some of them I read 5 pages, but sometimes I read 200 pages, and I don't finish the book. If I get to the end of a galley, it is spectacular. But there's just this never ending river of books coming at us. And my main job in the store is we have a huge first editions club, which is such a big part of our business. And I'm the person who picks those books. So I am, you know, I could just gripe about this forever. And again, I love it because I read people I would never have read. I read in ways and across genres and into things I never would have touched. But I also feel like the last 10 years of my reading life have really been mangled.
Yeah,
Discuss,
you
please.
you anticipated my next question actually, because I think about this a lot. Like I have people come into the store all the time and they're like, have you read this book? Have you read this book? And I'm like, well, I started it. You just can't read everything. But I was thinking about you all who like you need to read to inform your own writing, and you need to read to be kind of good literary citizens and support your fellow authors. And you need to read for the store. And so how do you balance all of that?
Turn out to be the same things. I also interviewed tons of writers.
Mhm.
And the reading that's required, you know, and people are like, hey, can you just interview so-and-so? And it's like, okay, I read her for last 2 books, but now I sort of feel like I need to read the 3 that came before that. And yeah, I'll shut up. Kelly, how's your reading going?
You know, I think that when so people have a fantasy also about working in bookstores, that you sit there and you read, and in fact, people who work in bookstores usually don't have the time while they are sitting in the store to read, because you are ordering books, you are putting things back where they go, you are helping customers, you're doing paperwork. The past year, it's all been shipping. And I think that in the same way that people who work in publishing usually don't read manuscripts or submissions in their office, they do it at home and on trains. It is the same for people who work in bookstores, who, especially people who own the bookstores, that they are constantly working from home, even when it is not a pandemic, doing reading, going to webinars, doing all of the work that comes with it. I don't write every day. Um, the thing that I like about having a small press and working in a bookstore is it's, for the most part, very scheduled work. I can put everything down on a calendar. I know when my responsibilities are going to be in what area, and then I can I can schedule breaks, you know, a week or 2 weeks in which I do a lot of writing, or I can take a month off and do it. My husband is the person who does most of the back end of the bookstore work, um, and so
Feel
I have time when I need it to sit down and do other kinds of work. But we are also such a small store that it's feasible, and this has been great during the pandemic, to have one person in there on shift, so that we didn't have to worry about our part-time staff exposing each other while they were on the job. And Gavin and I could go in together and work when that was required. My mother, I worked in a children's bookstore for years with my mom. She now lives next door to us up here, and so we can, she comes in and works as well. And in terms of the reading, we all have overlapping taste, but we all tackle different kinds of galleys. And we are enormously dependent on customers recommending things. We can't carry everything, but we definitely look at all the books that we order for people. During the pandemic, I think over half of our businesses involved shipping. And, you know, we sold certain books before the pandemic on a pretty regular basis. During the pandemic, we have sold a lot of different kinds of book genres, writers, and so we are getting a real education in what out-of-state orders people are interested in, but also the books that are community, without knowing what we have in stock, really wants to read. So the reading that our community does is super helpful in terms of what we order.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Alex, I was thinking about you as I was reading the Paris Hours, because it's historical. It takes place over a single day in Paris in 1927. You have these kind of exquisite details of the city. We go all over Paris. It's peopled by real characters from history. So obviously, like, that requires some research. So, you know, how do you factor that into your reading time?
Well, I mean, the research for that book was a complete joy, because it's, you know, I lived there and I love the place. And so being able to go back and to read cultural histories and biographies and look at old photos and all of those sorts of things, in addition to going on Google Maps and sort of scooting around the streets to make sure people were walking in the right direction. But most of the research for that book was done either just from memory or from reading. But I want to echo what Anne said about having your reading life mangled. I mean, it's so true, because I'm either reading for research, or yes, this endless tsunami of galleys that is coming at us. And the idea of sitting down and reading a book just for pleasure, or rereading a book, which Lord knows there are so many books I want to get back to, and I just can't, because even the books that I know I want to read, there isn't enough time in the day. So the research is just a different kind of reading, and I factor it in when I can and where I can. And you know, there's always, whatever I'm reading, I'm always thinking, oh, well, I could actually, there's something else I could be reading instead. So it's hard, but you just have to strike a balance.
Yeah. So I wonder now if we could talk a little bit about how you guys, the intersection of your own books and the selling of, like, how do you talk about your own books? How do you sell your own books? So I know that's like not entirely pleasant all the time. So, you know, you guys have been at this for a while, and like, what have you learned over the years? Does it get easier? You know, as people are coming up to you and saying, what's your book about? Like, obviously you practice, you prepare, but does your pitch evolve over time? You know, do you have trusted advisors that you go to? You know, how much do you look to, like, maybe your publishers to help you craft that kind of one-liner? I don't know. Anne, you have published many books.
Do I have a one-liner? Yeah, you know what, many of them. What I find is that when I'm writing a book, I can't possibly tell you what it's about in less than a half an hour. And by the time it's out, and God knows by the time I'm through with Bookstore, I can do it in 7 words. And it's just not a problem. I mean, it really boils down. As far as selling my books in the bookstore, boy, that was something I never saw coming. I never anticipated. But we sell a lot of Patchett books. And there is a display of them when you walk into the store. That really works. Emma Straub is a really good friend of mine. Louise Erdrich is a really good friend of mine. And we have all talked about that. You know, Louise's store is tiny, tiny, tiny. It's like 500 square feet. And she's written so many books. So like half of the books in the store are Louise's books. And it's enough to make a very, very brisk business. And people love it. You know, there's the whole pilgrimage aspect. It seems like anytime I'm in the store, I meet a group of people that say, we drove down here from Cleveland to meet you. And I'm like, what the hell, guys? Did you really think I was going to be here today? You know, like, what were you thinking? Or I'll walk in and they'll say, you know, somebody at the cash wrap will say to me, oh my gosh, a group from Sweden was here to meet you. They just left. And why didn't you call me? I would have come over. You know, it's, so that whole dynamic is constantly amazing and very touching.
Yeah, that is amazing. And actually, of your 3 stores, I have been to yours, Anne. I know what you're talking about. It's great display. And I will mention that Leslie has put links to all your stores in the chat, I believe, and that you all have signed copies that people can order through your site. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so go check those out. Get some signed copies. Kelly, what about you?
So there are 2 parts of this. One of the parts is I write short stories. Not everybody likes short stories. The short stories, many of them are ghost stories, or they are fantasy, and not everybody likes those. And I have a real horror of selling a book to somebody who is not going to enjoy the book. And in fact, part of the reason why we now have a bookstore is we missed hand selling books that we thought someone would love to somebody who would indeed love them. So the books that we feature are, we have a lot of Molly Gloss's books. We have Karen Joy Fowler's books. We sell a lot of Catherine Davis. We sell a lot of poetry. We sell a lot of my favorite science fiction books. We have, at the moment, a dedicated shelf of small beer titles. And again, I don't want to sell them to people who might not enjoy them. So it really is a matter of having conversations with people and finding out who they might enjoy reading. I had not really thought we have we live in a very small Pioneer Valley, not a huge population, but there is an enormous population of writers. Andrea Lawler, Jordy Rosenberg, Mo Willems, Holly Black, Cassandra Clare. We have an enormous local authors section, and we sell a lot of books by those writers. But we don't have a section of my books, but it is enormously pleasurable to know that my books are on the shelf. I think at this point, that is very satisfying to me that because of how fiction is positioned in the store, when I am at the counter, if I look directly across down at the very lowest shelf, I see all of my collections there. And I do get a kick out of that. And people do come to the store, or they did when we were open, and say, oh, I'm so excited that you're here on the days that I'm there. But really, we did this because we loved so many books that we don't publish, that the idea of having a space in which we could sell those books and put them in people's hands was part of the reason that we opened a bookstore.
Yeah, I love that. And you could see us all putting our hands over those authors you all mentioned. We're like, yes, yes. Alex, do you have a section in your store of your books?
Well, it's under G. It just sort of goes into the shelf. I mean, I think that, you know, what is interesting is that, you know, we all as authors, over the course of the writing and then the pre-publication to the book, you know, we are urged by our publicists, as Anne was saying, to sort of craft a message and to be able to hone it down. And whether you call it a elevator pitch or whatever, that you need to be able to, you know, talk about your book in at least a vaguely coherent way. That is one thing, and that I can do. But and of course, what you're doing there is you're trying to sell the book. But when you actually have somebody standing on the other side of the counter asking you to sell your book to them, that is an entirely different thing for me anyway. And it's like toe-curlingly embarrassing. And I tend to just run away from those situations and say, you probably need to speak to this person over here, to one of my colleagues, because they'll be able to do a better job of telling you what it's about. Because I just get terribly tongue-tied and embarrassed. So I sort of don't love that side of it. I'm always happy people do come in, and if I'm there, then they'll often ask me to sign the books. Of course, I'm always happy to do that. But yeah, it's for some reason doing it at one remove when you're sort of on a podcast or writing a blog or whatever it is, that fine with that. But when they're actually looking you in the eye going, go on then, tell me, why should I buy your book? It's a little hard. I can do it for everyone else's books just fine, but that is hard.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly awkward. So going back to a little bit what Kelly was talking about with this hand sell, and you've all had experience selling your own books in different places, like online retailers and big box stores. You know, what do you think is so special about independent bookstores? Is it what Kelly was talking about with the hand sell, or why independent bookstores?
Because you can't take your whole family to Anthropology after dinner, because it's a place to hang out. It is the place to go and kill 20 minutes when you're waiting to pick up your kid. It's a place when you want to be alone. It's the place when you want to run into your friends. It's just simply a place to be, and you don't need to come in and buy anything. You can just be there. It is a community center, and that's story time, and that's author events, and that's jazz workshops and cooking demonstrations and all of the other weird things that we do to fill out our role as part of the community. But I don't think that there is another place that serves that function. And, I always say, if you want to order your books on Amazon, that's fine. I care that you read, not how you read, not where you get your books. But what you can't do is go into an independent bookstore, talk to the staff, absorb that information, sit in the comfy chairs, play with our shop dogs, go to our author events, and then go home. And I feel like so much of what I am put on this earth to do is just reinforce that message. If you want this to be there later on, you have to support it. If you don't care, totally fine with that, but don't come in.
Yes.
And I would just add that, so all of that, of course, community, it's all about community. But, we all have limited space in our stores, and we all work very hard to curate the inventory very, very carefully. And so, when you go into an independent bookstore, that every book that appears, whether it's on a shelf or on a table, is going to have been very carefully chosen for that store. And one of the things that I just find so intoxicating about indies is that you can go into any store and the front table is going to be different in every single one. And it reflects the community that the shop is in. It reflects the tastes of the people who make those decisions. And that for me is the most thrilling thing. I was in Seattle at the beginning of last year, I suppose it was. I went to Elliott Bay for the first time in years and years and years, and was just wandering around with my eyes like this because there were all these books that I didn't know anything about, and I was busy making notes. And that's the joy of it, is that there is so much breadth, and all of these independent booksellers are just so brilliant and such extraordinary readers. And I always say that there is no algorithm in the world that is going to beat my business partner's brain when it comes to making book recommendations, and that you cannot get anywhere else.
Yeah, Kelly.
I still think about, I can still remember visually indie bookstores that I visited over a decade ago, which are no longer there. Shame and Drum. I can picture the layout. I can picture the tables. That those, if I have a memory palace, it's sort of different rooms in different bookstores. And that was one of the things that we talked about when we started. We had so little space that we knew that we were going to have to be picky about the books that we carried. And we were going to carry front lists, but we also were going to try and have sections that were deep, so that when you walked in, you would see books that maybe you would not find in other places, but which were books that we loved. And I think the most important thing for communities, not just the idea of the the space that you go into, but also that the money that comes in stays in the community, that it enriches the entire environment. You know, when we are surrounded where I am by a lot of other indie businesses, wonderful restaurants, some really interesting shops, and so people go up and down the street and they spend money at the ice cream store. They go have sushi. They walk into some of the boutiques. You know, they come into the bookstore, and like y'all said, I don't care if they spend money or not. What I want is, uh, you know, to be a place where people, where we are part of a community, um, in many different ways. A community of shops, a community of readers, a community of people who are interested in the same thing, in different things.
Yeah, I love that, Kelly. And also when I love my memory palace is that I have these books on my shelf and I'm looking at them. I'm like, oh, I got that at that bookstore. And I love that about buying books at indie stores too. We have a lot of questions coming in on the chat, so I'm gonna jump over to some of these audience questions for a minute. One question that's come in from Christina is, how has the pandemic impacted your writing and reading life? You want to jump in on that one?
Sad laughter. Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I'm writing now, but I spent a very long time not writing. I just couldn't do it. I was, and I haven't delved too deeply into precisely why I couldn't do it, but I just knew it wasn't happening. I mean, part of it was just worrying about the bookshop and having to pivot and go from just basically change our business model completely into a 100% mail order business. And our beautiful shop turned into a warehouse. And suddenly, rather than sending out a couple of books a day, we were sending out entire cratefuls, you know, and the poor mailman, he pretty quickly stopped just showing up on foot and would come up with his van and pull up outside. There were so many things to worry about, and also just, you know, the health of everybody in the store and and all of these things, and the paperwork for PPP loan application. I mean, there was just so much. I mean, there is not a cat's chance that you can then, after all of that, sit down and tell any kind of a story, at least any kind of a story that anybody would want to read. I couldn't anyway. And so I I sort of just accepted it. And I stopped. Now, I did read more because I wasn't writing, but it was very hard. And it was hard enough to negotiate the early months of the pandemic anyway, but having that on top and not writing, and it's this weight that sort of every day gets a little heavier, and another day I didn't write. So it was really hard.
And you said you were finishing up a book now?
Yeah, I wrote a book of essays. I couldn't write fiction during the pandemic. I had no idea. I had like no interest, no feeling of like, I'm going to be around to see this through. And so I started writing essays, and it was just the right thing for me. I really wrote a lot of very long essays during the pandemic. So I'm just finishing that. As far as reading is concerned, my great joy was I read all of Kate DiCamillo. I don't read a lot of middle grade, but I found that that was exactly right. Like a novel, a really brilliant novel that I could finish in 2 hours made me really happy. I also read a ton of social justice books because I kept thinking with the whole Black Lives Matter and everything going on in Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd, I would pick up books about suburban white people and think, I cannot bear this. And the book that I would want to read less than anything in the world would have been The Dutch House. And that was a strange, and it turns out a really wonderful thing. So I also was reading very much in my political comfort zone this year.
What about you, Kelly?
So when I am writing, I write with friends. I go to the house of a friend. A couple of us meet up. We all work in the same room. And during the first couple of months of the pandemic, or rather during the summer, it was warm enough that we could do this outside, although it was difficult. Um, and then once winter set in, that disappeared. And I found that this was not just a pleasant way to work, but it is the only reliable way at the moment that I have of making myself do work, in part because I have so many other kinds of work that I can focus on instead. And that was fine because I was reading for a jury. I had the bookstore work. We were still publishing books. And I found that the one story that I wrote, that all of my tools for evaluating whether I was engaged in doing something worth doing at all had sort of disappeared. So I could work, but it was very much like working in a fog, and very, very unpleasant in a way that is writing I don't find pleasant anyway, but this was more unpleasant than usual. So in a way, it was a relief to have the bookstore because that was very concrete, solid, time-consuming work that I felt much that we had also just that we had a different space that we could go to and engage in something that felt worthwhile.
Yeah, so you were reading for a jury, you said? I mean, we were talking about all the books you have to read. How many books did you have to read for that?
Well, it was a jury that it was for the Ray Bradbury Prize, and it was actually a 2-year jury. And when I signed on, I didn't realize this. So at the end of beginning of 2020, we picked a winner for 2019. I said to the other jurors, this was great. Really love doing this with you. Too bad we can't do it again. And they said, what do you mean we are doing this again? And I thought, oh no. But again, I read a lot of books that I would not have read otherwise. And I will say, I both hate galleys and I also am enormously excited whenever they arrive at the store that I think maybe this is a book that I will love. Maybe I will be able to find a book that I know someone else will love. And that's not true of every book, but that's actually a relief since we have so little space in the store. And reading for a jury is much the same. You're always hopeful when you begin.
It's so exciting to get the galleys. I just wish I could get to all of them, which leads me to a question from an audience member who asks, are the authors suggesting that there should be, or they wish there were fewer books published or provided to them as galleys? Are there too many books? And I've thought a lot about this in the past year, now owning a bookstore, when I realized when I worked at Houghton, I was like, we publish, these books. But now it's dawning on me the full scope of all of the books published every year. So what do you guys think?
I'm not suggesting anything like that. I'm complaining. That's
Yes.
that comes from a really different place. I completely agree with Kelly. Oh my God, I put my hands on things that 10 years ago I never would have picked up. And the fact that I do read so many things that I don't love, when you find something that you do love, it's absolutely thrilling. Before I had a bookstore, every book I read was amazing because I was reading throughout history and around the world. I was reading books that I had meant to read for 20 years. I was reading books that my friends had been begging me to read that I'd read a great review of. I thought all books were fabulous. That's not the case. And I've had 10 years of like looking back and thinking, I remember those halcyon days when every single thing I read was amazing. And that's just not the way it is. I mean, I read books now the way I read the newspaper. I mean, it really is like you can see fashion. You can see fashion in fiction and nonfiction. You can see trends that other people can't see because I'm reading things that aren't going to be coming out for another 5 months. It's amazing collectively what we are thinking as a society. And it goes through this long process of writing a book and the long process of getting published. and Bing, then suddenly I'm reading 2 short novels right now about nuns that are coming out at the same time. What?
Lauren Groff, are you reading Matrix?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's really good. Loved it. I
fantastic.
mean,
Yeah,
loved that book, The
yeah,
Matrix,
yeah.
out in
September.
September. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Kelly or Alex, do you guys have anything you want to add?
Well, I mean, Anne's right. It's a logistical problem for small bookstores, and how do you even try and get close to read all of the galleys that come in? And we do our best. We have 7 staff members, and we have a big Chinese cabinet, which is full. And we just encourage people to read, and they mark off what they've read. So we try not to duplicate too much. There are certain people who have different areas of expertise or interest, and they tend to stick there, and we'll all choose what we want. But it's just, I mean, one of the things that I've learned that I was unaware of when all I did was write books was just, I mean, the sheer number of these books. And when you go through with a sales rep, and you go on this online forum called Edelweiss, which is what booksellers use to sort of look at the catalogs of the publishers. And these catalogs, like this, the spring catalog of a major publisher will have 700, 800 titles on it. And you have to go through them all. And, I mean, there's just no way, no matter how wonderful all of the books look and how you can imagine them on your shelves, you simply can't. There isn't the space to do it. And so we have to make these curatorial decisions, and they're hard. All day, every day, we have to make these decisions about what we are, well, it's more what we are going to stock rather than what we're not going to stock. And it's hard, but it's also very rewarding when you get it right. So it's not a suggestion there should be any less, because there will be a shop where those other books are perfect, but it's just not ours.
I think complaining, when I am with my writer friends, we complain about writing. We complain about how publishing works. When I am with small press people, we complain about distribution. We complain about Amazon. We complain about lots of things. You complain about the parts of your life that you are deeply engaged with, that you love, that present you with unending piles of work. And so, yes, I am buried under a deluge of things that in theory I love, but which are also work. And I think it is that thing that when you are fortunate enough to have a life that is made up of kinds of work in the things that you most love, you complain about the fact that the things that you love are also work, that it's natural. So, there are certainly galleys that I read, and I have complaints as a writer with the language, or I have complaints as a publisher because I think this should not have been published, or I have, complaints because something is too good and I don't understand how they did it.
Yes.
But that's because complaining makes work easier.
Go ahead, Anne, sorry.
Can I ask a question? A big problem that I have is the number of people who want me to save them, who are sending manuscripts, who are sending self-published books. How can I get this published? How can I, will you promote it? Will you do an event with us? Will you and Patchett blow some fairy dust on this thing and save me? And it is really at such a point that I can't even answer all the letters. There are so many of them. And I'm just wondering how you guys deal with that.
I think that you are that you are visible, that your bookstore is visible, you are visible. I think this is the reward of doing good work for long enough and having enough success that other people see you as sort of a patron saint. We get a very small amount of that, and I feel that my response is this: when we first began publishing books, I thought I will not be able to say no to people. If a friend whom I love comes to me with a project that I feel we are not the right publisher for, I cannot imagine how painful it will be to say no. And then what I found is it's very easy to just say no. This
Yeah.
is not, we're not the right people to do this. And I think the thing that is frustrating to me about the people who come is the knowledge that clear communication is not possible, that I cannot have a conversation in which I can explain to them why something is not appropriate, or why I would not be able to help, or why this is the wrong way, or conversely, here is the thing that you, person who needs this, could actually do that would maybe make this work in a way analogous to what you want it to do. And most of the time what I think is, this is a not a useful conversation. This is not, someone is not going to be able to take away the thing from this conversation that they need. And so I am not going to engage in it. But I have a good friend who gave many of us necklaces that just say no, so that we, when we are in this situation, what we are able to remind ourselves is sometimes no, or no answer at all, is the best possible answer.
Yeah, I think, as authors, I'm sure we're all asked to give blurbs for books all the time. And that's something which I always try and do if I possibly can, just for sort of karma purposes. And I've been so lucky and so grateful with the people who've been kind enough to talk about my book. So I always try and pay it forward. But I think that where we are with the bookstore as well, it sort of elevates, there's a sort of different sort of nexus of commerce and art and all of these things. And people think that we have the sort of some sort of magic key, and people do. They just walk in and they say, "Hey, would you read my manuscript?" Or "Who's your agent?" To which I say, "Well, it's in the back of the book. I thank them, so you can just go and look there." Yeah, you need to be able to say no to all of that. And I ought to just take them to the back, show them that Chinese box, and say, "Look at all these books I haven't read yet." So it's but I also recognize that, I just come from this sort of position of enormous privilege. I was lucky enough to be published. I'm lucky enough to spend my days in a bookshop. So why shouldn't people ask me? And I try and, to the extent that I can, I try and at least give them some resources where they might go. I mean, in Columbia, there is a very vibrant writing community, and there are all sorts of places where people can go and get advice. But and so I sort of try and divert them there.
There's a question I think we can answer fairly quickly, and I think Alex might be able to answer it for us, because he is wearing a Libro FM t-shirt. And the question is, let's see it. There we go. The question is, I love independent booksellers, but I also love audiobooks. Are there any ways to give support to independent booksellers while accessing audiobooks? So Alex, can you tell us what Libro FM is?
Yes, Libro FM is the best thing. We love them. They are fantastic. They are a company that it basically provides exactly the same service as Audible, but rather than putting money into the pockets of Jeff Bezos, it puts money into the pockets of independent bookstores. You can go and you can choose which bookstore you want to support, and you can then buy your books from there. I think it costs the same. It's pretty much identical terms in terms of what you get. It may actually be a tiny bit better. And certainly I know that there are sort of bonuses and things that you can get from swapping from Audible to Libro. They are amazing supporters of independent bookstores. And in fact, yesterday during Independent Bookstore Day, in fact, I think it's over the whole weekend, if you spent $15 in any independent bookstore and you send them the receipt, you get a free audiobook. I mean, it's wonderful what they do. They get it. They completely get it. If you go onto the website, there are curated playlists. There are all sorts of bookseller recommendations. It's just the best. And everybody at Skylark listens to audiobooks all the time. Some of us listen to them at 3 times the speed, which they must sound like Pinky and Perky as they're going, but I don't. But everyone to their own, I suppose. But I don't. I like to listen to them at the correct speed. But no, Libro FM, absolutely fantastic. There is no reason on earth why anybody should listen to Audible.
Yay, thank you.
A little
Yeah.
bit too strong there.
No, that was great. Another quick one, Anne, you had said that you can get your pitch for your books down to 7 words. So someone is asking, what are the 7 words you use to sum up The Dutch House?
Brother and sister reconcile the past. Brother and sister reconcile the past. There you go.
Amazing.
Good.
And Alex, a question for you. Why choose 1927 as the time for the Paris Hours?
Oh goodness. Well, I don't think I have a 7-word answer to that because it's quite a long and involved question. But it was an amazing period. I mean, Paris after the war, there was this extraordinary explosion of creativity, whether it's James Joyce or Ernest Hemingway or Sidney Bechet or Josephine Baker or Gertrude Stein, all the people who appear in the book. It was just a really, really interesting period. And I didn't want to write a book set in Paris in World War II.
Cool, great. A few more than 7 words, but we'll forgive you.
Sorry.
We have a lot of people asking for, that we've been talking about reading so much in galleys. A lot of people are asking for recommendations. Either what are your staff picks right now, or just in general, what's a book you'd be recommending now or soon?
I can start. You know, one of our favorite book, my favorite book, Gavin's favorite book, my mom's favorite book that we hand sell the most is Molly Gloss's Hearts of Horses. That is a book that for years I gave to people for birthdays, whether or not they liked books, they got it, and almost everyone loved it. And so when people come in and say, I'm looking for a present for somebody who's a little picky, that is the book that we recommend, and often they buy a copy for themselves as well.
Elizabeth Mccracken's Souvenir Museum collection of short stories, just her best. And I don't care. She's a really, really close friend of mine. I don't care. This is a spectacular book and the very, very best Elizabeth Mccracken book, and it's thrilling. Also next week, Joan Silber's The Secrets of Happiness. I did not think that she could top Improvements, which was her last book, and this book just kills it. And it's tiny. I think it's less than 200 pages. And also I love that George Saunders book about Russian literature, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. I can do this all day long. I'll shut up. Okay.
I love that book. That was such a wonderful book, the Saunders book. And I particularly liked after his essay on the story, how he would do these little sort of bits about his practice and his writing practice. And I was just underlining everything. It was just absolutely wonderful. For us, one of the books that we have sold an absolute ton of, and we love it so much, is The Book of Delights by Ross Gay, which are these collection of micro essays that he wrote from one birthday to the next birthday. And they're about all sorts of weird things. But he was just looking for, he set himself this practice of looking for one thing a day that delighted him. And then he would write it down, and then he just turned the page and did it again the next day. And the way that we sell this book is we pick it up. Again, it's a very small book. We'd point to the author photo on the back cover, and there's this picture of Ross with this enormous smile on his face, and we just say, look, if you read this book, this is what you'll feel like. And it's like happiness in your hand. And we've sold a ton of them. It's just, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. It's a great gift book. It's been a wonderful book during the pandemic as well, when people come in and they say, oh, I need to pick me up. So Book of Delights by Ross Gay.
Great. I think we have time for at least one more question. So we have a couple of people asking about events, and I know it's kind of a different story the past year, but do you all do author events? Are you doing them virtually right now? And do author events help your bottom line? Do they more sales?
at Parnassus, we did over 300 events a year before the pandemic, and we were slow to figure out online events, and we have figured them out. And, you know, one of the things that I'm really good at is directly asking people what I want them to do. When this event is over, I want you to go and buy the book. And this is why. You know, we're keeping our employees on staff. We're paying everybody's health insurance. They're going home and they're buying their dog food. So if you want this dog to have a dinner tonight, you have got to buy this book. I actually made a video with Sparky for all the literary festivals because people were like, Anne, how can we get people to buy the book from their local independent booksellers if we're doing it online? And I was like, I'll just scare people. So I've been making all these videos and sending them out for other people to use. Hey, let me explain how this works. And it does work. And one of the things that I have loved is just how innovative and creative we've been, and all independent bookstores have been, about engaging people with books and literature.
Yeah, we did a thing called Skyku. We were trying to work out how do you actually turn those online events into sales. And so we got all of the authors who we invited to do the online events to write a haiku that we called a Skyku. And then we printed them out, sent them to them, they signed them, numbered them, sent them back. And then we actually had, so we basically bribed our customers with something that they couldn't get anywhere else, which of course is the whole essence of the independent bookstore idea anyway. It's like you're going to get something here that maybe you can't get anywhere else. So we tried that. So that seemed to go okay.
We had done a number of events, maybe for us, maybe 3 per month before we shut down. And we have continued to do them over Zoom. We are not selling nearly as many as when we did the live events. But on the other hand, the audiences are people from all over, which is kind of wonderful. And so, you know, one, we get the feeling, we know that we've introduced or maybe created an experience with a writer or with 2 writers that someone might not have had access to otherwise, which is a pretty great feeling. And 2, we hope that even if someone doesn't buy a book at this event, that they will buy that book at another independent bookstore, maybe local to them, or that in the future they will think fondly of the store and maybe pay us a visit in the future. And the issue for us now is trying to imagine what events will look like over the next year, whether we feel comfortable having in our very tiny store 70 people, which was the case sometimes. And we're not sure that we feel comfortable. So we may continue to do Zoom events for the future.
I'm going to channel Anne right now and say, after this event, I want everyone at home to go support any independent bookstore, go buy a book. Like Anne was saying earlier, if you want them to stay in your communities, you need to support them. This has been amazing, you guys. Thank you so much. I think we're about out of time. So I've had a wonderful time.
You know, I wish you could keep going, and I'm trying to get some of the links for the books directly from the publishers, not the Evil Empire links. But thank you all so much. This has been so interesting. Hannah, you did a great job. Everyone, thank you so much. And panelists, thank you so much for all your great questions and for your participation at this event and the Newburyport Literary Festival. We are so happy that you were able to make it. There are a couple more events this afternoon, and I hope you all have a great day. Take care.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.